Courage. It's another one of those big words, another one of those American values that's ingrained into who we are, another one that inspires big quotes, like when Nelson Mandela said, "I learned that courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. He who has courage is not the one who does not fear, but the one who conquers that fear." And courage is another one that we make amazing, epic movies about.
By noon this day, you will be dead men. 1,000 nations of the Persian Empire descend upon you. Our arrows will blot out the sun.
Then we will fight in the shade.
You have so, and you know it.
Have not slander and calumny. I have only ever embraced that oldest and noblest of pirate traditions. We must fight to run away.
Saints, what in heaven's name do we do?
Sometimes, the true hero is the one with the courage to run away.
I like the way this man thinks.
Let's run.
We can't run.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. It's been established that we can run.
If I swear to him that all that I am is dead already,
We'll die, it will be awful.
every man dies. Not every man really lives.
And courage, too, is one that I've learned a lot about as a parent in watching and experiencing my kids. Okay, Emma, are you ready to hang? Can you hang way up high? All right. Whoa!
Daddy, watch this. Daddy, I can bounce.
All right, Jimmy, let's see how far you can jump, man. Woo! All right, even farther.
Watch his head.
Let's see. Woohoo! All right, even farther. Can you jump this far?
No.
No? You're not gonna do it?
Daddy, you want me to jump down and then you can...
No, I want you to jump all the way to me.
I can't.
You can't? Is this too far?
Yeah, too.
How far? How far?
Yeah, that far.
This far?
I can go that far. No, a little bit.
A little bit closer?
Yeah, that can do it.
All right, let's see. Woohoo! I think all of us, when we're real little, have that kind of fearlessness like Emma has, to just hang and figure somebody will catch me. But then as we grow up, even by the time we get to be 4 years old, like Jimmy, we stop and we have pause. We get to that point where we think, hey, tickle? You're silly. We think, hey, that's too far. And I think part of the reason is evidenced by Emma's face. Come here. Woo! Take a look at this. This is what happens when fearless courage of a kid meets stairway. And I think sometimes we hit these stairways in our lives. We hit a little bit of resistance and something bad happens and we get burned and we decide, man, I can't be courageous anymore. I can't try that. But you know what I think? I think that most of us, when we've been burned once and we give up on courage, when we give up on being bold and doing crazy things because we fell down the stairs and hurt our face once, we end up living lives that stop far short of what we're capable of. We end up like Jimmy, beckoning God to come closer and closer and closer and closer, far closer than we need him to come because we're so deathly afraid to jump. And when we live our lives defined by that fear, we live lives that are so much less than the lives that God created us for. We stop believing that there could possibly be a hero inside every single one of us. We start dreaming about life instead of living out our dreams. And so we live our lives just totally defined by fear because on some level it just seems rational to us to live in fear. It seems like the thing that's sensible. I'm reminded of this story in the Old Testament. The Philistines were constantly oppressing the Israelites, and at one point they'd just beaten them down to the point that they stole all the metal workers. And Israel, the entire nation, the entire army only had 2 swords. The king Saul had one, and his son Jonathan had the other one. And then they're going out to fight the Philistines, and they're like, holy smokes, the Philistines have all the swords. And so Saul, being rational, which is more like just living in total fear because he didn't want to get burned, decides that, man, we're just gonna camp out, we're not gonna attack, we're kind of just gonna hide out and hope that they go away. But his son Jonathan got this idea that maybe they should do something. And so he took one of the 2 swords that Israel had, and he took his armor bearer, and he was like, hey man, let's go attack the Philistines. And his armor bearer was like, what? We only have 1 sword between 2 guys, and we're gonna, like, there's thousands of them, we're gonna do this? And Jonathan said, yeah, let's go. You know why Jonathan said that? Because he looked through a different lens than Saul looked. Saul looked at the situation through the lens of his capability. All he saw was through the lens of 2 swords versus thousands of swords. But Jonathan looked through the lens of God, of who God was and what God was capable of doing, and that changed everything. And so he went and he attacked them, and he slayed the Philistines so quickly and so powerfully, he killed so many of them, that the rest of the army just ran away, because Jonathan knew that God could do what he couldn't. Jonathan didn't see through human eyes. He saw through the lens of God's power. See, I think one of the biggest reasons that we live in fear, one of the biggest reasons that we lack the courage to be who God calls us to be, is because we believe what the world says about us. Because we allow the world to label us instead of allowing God to label us. And we look at the world through the lens of what people have told us we are. And here's the thing I want to tell you tonight. The world will always label you by your worst. The world will always label you by your least. And if your worst and your least, if your failures and your faults and your pain is the thing that defines you, if that's the label that you wear around, if that's the lens that you look through, it's hard to be courageous. See, God doesn't define us by that. God defines us by the very best of who he created us to be. And God defines us by what he accomplished on the cross. He defines us by love. And if that's the lens that we look through, if we look in the mirror and we see someone who God created, and God created with a purpose, and God loved enough to die for, then that changes the game. It changes the game for us like it changed the game for Jonathan, and we can start to see the world through God's eyes instead of our own. We can start to see ourselves through the lens that God sees us through instead of the lens that the world sees us through. We can start to define ourselves by the very best of who we are instead of the worst, and we can live with a kind of courage that maybe we've never known. We can live with a kind of courage that changes the world. So I want to challenge you guys tonight. I want to challenge you to accept God's permission slip to live a courageous life. I want to challenge you to stop seeing yourself the way the world sees you and start seeing yourself the way that God sees you, to walk out of house groups this evening and boldly glorify God with all that he created you to be, and boldly proclaim him to those around you. You absolutely can make a difference in the lives of the people around you every day if you will just live with the courage that God created you for. And if you don't believe that, take a look at Jesus and his disciples. There's not a less likely candidate in the world to make an impact than Jesus. He never commanded an army. He never held an office. He didn't know any famous people. He never really traveled, and he never wrote a book. He just walked around with a band of fishermen who were relatively uneducated and ridiculously unimportant. And that group of guys, because they knew who Jesus called them to be, impacted the world in a way that is immeasurable. We can't even imagine world history without the church, because those guys walked around with Jesus and they refused to see themselves the way the world saw them. They refused anymore to see themselves as just a bunch of stupid, unimportant fishermen, and they began to see themselves as world changers with a world-changing message, and it changed the course of world history, and it continues to change the world today. And so what I want to challenge you with tonight is to stop living in fear and stop letting the world define who you are and who you're going to be, and start believing that the message you have, the message of Jesus Christ who came and died, is such a powerful message that it can change lives and it can define who you are if you just have the courage to jump.